All right, welcome to the Week 5 Forum. This week we're dealing with, if I remember correctly, this is Chapter 4 on civil liberties. We want to talk a little bit about sort of the founding debate about civil liberties and how uh, civil liberties applies to the federal government and ultimately to the state governments. We want to explain how the Supreme Court has interpreted freedom of religion and other First Amendment, freedoms over time. We want to talk a little bit about how the Supreme Court has interpreted freedom of speech, assembly, petition, and the press. We want to talk a little bit about how the Supreme Court has interpreted the right to bear arms, and then explain how the Supreme Court has interpreted the various due process guarantees offered in those, Fourth through the Eighth Amendments. Um, we're also going to talk about privacy and where privacy is kind of inferred or implied in the Constitution and how the Supreme Court has interpreted that. So again, when we look at it, formally, the idea of civil liberties is embodied in the Bill of Rights in those specific guarantees. And we oftentimes look at sort of our First Amendment freedoms and say, we have a right to do this, we have a right to do that. Um, but all these different rights come with limitations as well. They exist in tension with other rights. Your right to bear arms is limited by the extent to which your brandishing a gun threatens my right to freedom of expression. You have a right to say, I don't want to take a vaccine for COVID-19, but that doesn't necessarily confer upon you an absolute right to work as a nurse or, frankly, to be out in public. If you choose not to be vaccinated, there's a very real possibility that you won't be allowed to get on an airplane pretty soon. So it's important to keep in mind, and again, each of these rights is very important and needs to be respected, and government cannot arbitrarily infringe upon them. However, government, if they can provide a reasonable rationale for doing something, they can abridge your rights. They can prevent, churches from having, large gathering events in the midst of a pandemic. That's something, again, that I think the court has ruled in one way, but historically, courts have often said, no, you don't have a right to social gather. You're going to kill people. Um, Likewise, the right to bear arms. Again, this is an important thing that relates as much to federalism as it does to individuals' rights to keep and bear arms. I think there's a historical context to this. A lot of the anti-federalist criticisms of the Constitution during the ratification debates centered on Article 1, basically asserting to the federal government and to the Congress the power to raise and maintain armies. They feared again that would be used to abrogate the states' rights to have a militia. And so the Second Amendment, again, it's a compound sentence, right? A well-regulated militia being essential to the freedom of a state. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be, infringed or abridged. And so, what does it mean? Which of these clauses is more important for understanding historically the purpose behind the Second Amendment? And if you think about it, I think it gets down to the notion that the framers wanted to reassure federalists, people who believed in the sovereignty of the states, that the federal government would not take that power away from them. And in fact, that's why we have, the National Guard, the Oklahoma National Guard, and the Oklahoma National Reserve. That is how federalism works in terms of our raising and maintaining an army and ensuring that both the federal and the state governments have a role to play in this. Um, Likewise, one of my kind of hobby horses is the Eighth Amendment. It talks a lot about things like, excessive bail. Let me see, I'm going to find it. Um, Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. What was it designed to prevent? Well, clearly it was designed to prevent things like drawing and quartering and things that involved the infliction of death via torture. That was a common thing to be done in high medieval Europe. But we believe that that was not the appropriate way for the state to behave vis-a-vis people that were convicted of crimes. And so, basically the argument was, we're not going to do those things. We're still going to kill people, but we're going to do it humanely. And so again, what constitutes cruel and unusual punishment depends upon what we call community standards, right? There was a period of time, in the middle of the 19th century, where there was a very strong movement driven by one of the great religious revivals to do away with the death penalty. The Civil War largely killed that, and again, what happened was the experience of the Civil War kind of coarsened people and led them to say, yeah, some people do need to die, and let's kill them. But the problem today, again, is how do you kill people? And does the state deserve to have that responsibility? And it's interesting, liberals and conservatives find themselves on the opposite sides of a lot of issues. Conservatives don't believe that abortion is acceptable, and they would like the state to do away with it, but they're perfectly okay with inflicting the death penalty on people. Liberals, on the other hand, are more skeptical of the application of the death penalty, but otherwise would say regarding abortion that women have a right to decide what to do with their bodies, and especially as it relates to the reproductive process. And the question there again is, when, is a fetus, when does it become a human being? Conservatives want to say, they want to follow Catholic doctrine and say that life begins at conception. Well, even Catholicism was a bit, sort of wishy-washy on that. In the medieval period, life and when you were considered to be ensorcelled, when you were considered to have a soul, began at first breath. Again, that was for purposes of conferring upon the person last rites and things like that. And so, again, it gets back to this idea of to what extent should a particular moral doctrine drive government policy, and we're going to find out in the very near term, which side of that ledger the Supreme Court is going to find itself. So, as with every week, there's a lot to talk about. If there's anything in this chapter that confuses you, let's talk about it in the forum. Hopefully I can clear it up. If you disagree with one another, let's do so agreeably. Let's be polite to one another. It's problematical when we start, yelling at one another, and that's not a good way to debate. So let's be civil to one another, and let's have a great week of discussion.